morning, children. Hope you've had another great week. Today is a very, very important story time because we celebrate something very, very special this weekend. Have a little chat to your grown-ups. What do you think it could be? What special event is happening? In fact, it's already started because we're now on Good Friday. That's right, children. It is Easter weekend. And during the Easter period, we eat lots of nice chocolate, don't we? Mrs. Clark's hoping that the Easter bunnies remembered her because you know that I love chocolate, don't you, children? But it's also a very special time, Easter, because we get to remember, in the Christian calendar, we get to remember one very special person, and that's Jesus and his sacrifices that he made. So today, I thought I'd share with you a book that my two children really have enjoyed this week. It was sent by their grandparents at the beginning of the week, just to remind them of what really the importance of Easter is. So it is the Easter story. And lots of you might already have done this because it was on our Year 1 blog. But I thought I would read it to you as well because it's a very, very special version of it. I hope you enjoy it. The Easter story. Jesus was a man who travelled around his country Israel 2,000 years ago, teaching about God. Jesus knew God because God was his loving Father. Jesus did incredible miracles like healing sick people, calming storms, and feeding thousands of people from just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That is amazing. Can you remember that story, children? We did that just before we broke up the loaves and the fishes. Jesus promised people that God's king was coming and that his kingdom was free to everybody to enter. The crowds loved Jesus, but some religious leaders didn't like what he was teaching, especially his claim to God. They thought, why is he so special? Why does he get a claim to God? At this time, the people were ruled by the Romans, who were often very nasty and forced everybody to pay lots of tax, which is money that you have to pay to the government. Unsurprisingly, people didn't like the Romans and looked forward to the day when God's king would rescue them. There he is, look, counting all his money. Greed. Many people followed Jesus, including 12 men who were his close friends. They are known as his disciples. One spring, after teaching for 3 years, Jesus and his disciples went to the city of Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. Passover reminded the Jewish people how God cared for them a long time ago and how he had rescued them from slavery. Because it was a feast, there was a special meal to remember the agreement God had made with them when he rescued them. As Jesus and his disciples went to Jerusalem, there was a lot of excitement. It was also a time when people offered sacrifices to God in the temple because they believed that these paid the price for what they had done wrong. Everybody, including Jesus' disciples, hoped that the king was what they were waiting for. Jesus, however, had warned his disciples that it wasn't going to be like that and he was going to die and come back to life. The trouble was that they didn't understand him. So when Jesus came into Jerusalem, he didn't ride in as a mighty king on an impressive horse as the people expected, but instead came on a gentle donkey. People cheered, but they were very puzzled. Fancy that, a king coming into a country on a horse. On a little gentle donkey. The most important place in Jerusalem was the temple. It was an enormous building where sacrifices to God were made. As its very centre was a special room sealed off by a great curtain. Now, although the people knew that God was everywhere, they believed that this room was somewhere very special. It was as though it was a place where God lived. It was such an important place that only one man was allowed to enter it, and then just once a year. Ordinary people like you and me weren't allowed to get anywhere near it. Not at all. The temple should have been treated with respect, but when Jesus went to see it, he found it was more like a marketplace. It was full of noisy animals and people selling things to the poor and cheating them. Jesus shouted, "You've let God's house become the house of robbers," and told some people to get out. They didn't like that. Over the next few days, Jesus taught in Jerusalem, but many of the religious leaders wanted to get rid of him. But getting rid of Jesus wasn't easy. He was popular and Jerusalem was crowded with visitors. Then one of the disciples, a man called Judas, came to the bad leaders. "If you pay me money," he said, "I'll show you how to catch Jesus." They agreed to his offer. I thought he was supposed to be his friend. The sacrifices for Passover were made on the Friday afternoon. The evening before that, Jesus held a special meal with his 12 disciples. He took bread and wine and told everybody that they were symbols of his death. Jesus also told his friends that he would be going away, but he would send them God's Holy Spirit. "I'm going to make a new agreement between God and people," he said. His friends didn't understand what he meant. After the meal, Jesus went out with his friends to a quiet garden where he prayed about what was going to happen. As he finished praying, Judas arrived with soldiers to arrest him. Instead of staying with him, Jesus' friends ran away. Judas realised that he had made a terrible mistake, but by then it was too late. Oh dear. Early on the Friday morning, Jesus was brought in front of the religious leaders. They accused him of saying wrong things about God and of claiming to be God's king. Finally, Jesus told them that he was indeed God's king. That made the religious leaders angry, and they sent Jesus to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, a man who had power to put Jesus to death. Pontius Pilate soon decided that Jesus was innocent and he should be set free, but the religious leaders and the crowd had gathered demanded that Jesus be killed. The Roman punishment for their enemies was crucifixion, being nailed to a cross made from pieces of wood and left to die. Hoping that he could save Jesus from being crucified, Pilate had him beaten by the soldiers. It wasn't enough for the crowd. "Crucify him!" they shouted. In the end, Pilate ordered that Jesus should be put to death. Poor Jesus. Now the story gets as sad as the story can be. Jesus was taken to a place where everybody could see him, and he was nailed to the cross. Crowds gathered around the cross, and people laughed and joked about Jesus in the cruelest of ways. Where were Jesus' disciples at this horrible time? Sadly, almost all of them had run away, but some of the women who had followed him stayed to watch what happened. As Jesus began to die, an awful darkness fell across the land. Day became night. It was as if Jesus was grabbing hold of every evil and horrible thing in the world and taking it into himself. Finally, Jesus died. As he did, the great curtain in the temple that separated the place where God lived from everybody else was ripped apart by some invisible force. It was a sign that Jesus had made a way to God for everybody. The sacrifices in the temple were never going to be needed again. As the sun began to set, Jesus' body was taken by a good religious leader and wrapped in a cloth and taken to a private garden where it was put in a tomb that was like a cave. The tomb was closed by a big, heavy stone. Meanwhile, Pontius Pilate ordered soldiers to stand guard around the tomb in case Jesus' body was stolen. Night fell. Saturday was a special day of rest when nothing was allowed to happen. It came and went. So tomorrow, children, it's a day of rest. Remember that. The women who followed Jesus knew that because everybody had been so rushed, Jesus' body had not been properly prepared for the grave. So early on the Sunday morning they returned to the tomb with the special spices needed for the burial. But when they got there, they found, to their astonishment, that the soldiers had gone and the big heavy stone guarding the tomb had been rolled away. Looking inside, they saw that the body of Jesus was not there, but instead, neatly folded, was the cloth in which Jesus had been wrapped. It all made no sense. Where had he gone? How had he got out of that? With that big heavy stone over his tomb? How could he possibly have got out? Then they saw an angel who told them that Jesus was no longer dead but alive. The women ran back quickly to where Jesus' disciples were hiding and told them the news, but they found it very difficult to believe. That Easter Sunday, Jesus began appearing to his disciples and followers. At first they found it hard to believe, but soon they realised there could be no doubt that Jesus was really alive again. It was certainly Jesus, because he still had the scars on his hand from being nailed to the cross. And he was really alive because they could talk to him, touch him and eat with him. It was very exciting news because Jesus had fought with death and defeated it. For 40 days Jesus spoke with his disciples and followers. He turned up in rooms and on roads. He appeared to men and women, and on one occasion to hundreds of people. During this time, Jesus explained to his followers that God's King needed to die in order to be the sacrifice for the wrong things that we have all done. But because he was innocent, death hadn't been able to keep hold of him. Jesus was now the King who could give eternal life to those who trusted him. As Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth and the life." Jesus also told his followers that they were to share this good news about with him with the whole world, and that wherever they went, he would always be with them. He promised that one day he would come back from heaven to earth and make everything in the world new and right. Finally, Jesus met with his followers and told them it was time for him to return to heaven. With those words, he rose into the sky and disappeared from sight. Jesus is God's King, and we can now know him and know that he will be with us forever. Pray this prayer if you would like to know Jesus. Dear Jesus, thank you for dying on the cross for me. I ask you to forgive me for all the wrong things I have done and come into my life by your Holy Spirit. Fill me with your peace, your presence and your power. Thank you, King Jesus. Please reign over my life. Amen. And that is the Easter story, children. All about Jesus and what he did for our world. And hopefully he'll be looking down on us right now in these times of uncertainty, really. But we're all going to keep safe, aren't we, children? So till next time, see you again. Bye.